Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Stranger Things Season 5 Episode 8. It's called The Right Side Up. And it's weird to be doing only one episode of Stranger Things again. But yeah, the finale's here. I have lots of thoughts. There's a lot to go into. I kind of predicted that it was probably going to be like a weirdly broken up episode, and I expected a good chunk of it to be an epilogue, and it was. Like, I checked the runtime when it switched into epilogue mode and there was like 45 minutes left of the 2 hours and 5-minute runtime, so clearly a lot of time was spent on the epilogue and like giving these characters a send-off and a lot of that stuff, and I'll talk a lot about that I think, because that's kind of the goodbyes to everyone. But if I was to give some initial impressions of some blanket statements before I start diving into it a bit more, I think that this episode, and this kind of goes for the season as well in a lot of ways, but this episode is full of great moments, moments that really, really hit, and a lot of that is because we've been attached to the characters for so long. But I also think that there's some sloppiness in the structure. And I think that goes for the season. I think now that I've seen the whole final season, I do think the final season is the weakest season of the show. I think previously I'd have said season 2 was the weakest, even though I love a lot of season 2. There's a couple of weak elements, and particularly the Callie episode is not aged well, and it's in many ways aged worse now that we've had the final season, and I've had to put up with their very thin attempt at doing anything else with that character, which is going to be one of the things I talk about as I go into this. Because here's the thing, it's kind of clear why they wanted to bring Callie back. Aside from maybe the whole we set her up so we feel like we should do something with her, aside from that, it's clear they wanted to bring her back because they wanted to do this ending with this open kind of like, oh, maybe one last illusion was cast to give them an out, to say that Eleven got away and that she is okay, but she just kind of faked her death rather than actually dying, right? And that's fine as a mechanical thing in the moment, because it's been long set up what Callie's power is. But every single step to get to the point where Elle was making this decision, like her being tempted with it, thinking about it, confronting Hopper about it, every single step of it, I think, was some of the weakest stuff in the entire season. So because I never really bought into this idea of her making this choice, it felt really forced to add extra drama. The fact that the finale kind of hinges a lot on the emotion of that, it's kind of weird, because it feels like Elle's not been the focus of this season, really, in any great way. So it felt a little strange that all of a sudden, like, she's kind of like the focal point of everything again. Even though it's not weird for her to be the focal point. She was at the start of the show. She was for quite a long time. But it feels weird in the context of this final season and final episode. Particularly, I think this episode feels very simplistic in the way it's laid out, and I think one of the most fun things I like about Stranger Things when it's firing in all cylinders is how 2 or 3 different threads that are all interweaving together all kind of work in unison to really click and make sense. But to be honest, the whole plan, the Beanstalk plan to go and get the kids and take out Vecna and all that, even though it kind of sets up multiple elements of it, they mostly kind of like focus on the one, then that kind of comes to an end. We'll get a little update on the others in the meantime, but it didn't feel like it was like effortlessly bouncing between them where each one was affecting the other in the way that it normally does. It felt a lot more straightforward to me than a lot of the better Stranger Things plans. I think this episode still got a lot of great stuff in it, because a lot of the goodbyes, a lot of the epilogues, a lot of that stuff did feel kind of emotional. I thought a lot of that stuff landed really well. The epilogue stuff, probably my favorite. And as far as like the fun Stranger Things, like supernatural monster stuff goes, they had a giant mind flayer monster, not the version created out of people like the one that was in season 3, but the physical, real version that is very much the real evil of the show, it turns out. Not that Vecna turns out not to be evil. Turns out Vecna is quite happy buddying up with the Mind Flayer, but the Mind Flayer did exist first and kind of even gave Vecna the powers. We see what was in the case. It was some, rock from this other planet, maybe crashed in a meteor or something. We never got too much detail in it. But immediately as soon as he touches it, he hears this voice saying, "Come find me," and that's kind of the path to everything that's happened in the show, all from that point. So, like, like all the stuff with the giant monster was cool. It felt super expensive. The monster itself, it looked great. It felt big and epic, which feels kind of cool. It's just that the actual confrontation with it feels very simplistic compared to the fight with it in the mall in season 3. And season 3 is my favorite season of the show, for a couple of reasons, but I think one of the reasons why it's my favorite season of the show is that it's the one season where I don't think there's a single plot line that I think is weaker. I think they're all good. I think Joyce, Hopper, together with the Russian guy and all that, Alexei, great plot. All the main stuff with the kids in the mall, the stuff with Dustin, Steve, Robin, Erica down in the lab and all that, all fantastic. There was not a weak link for me in season 3, whereas the other seasons tend to have at least one plot that's not great, because I love season 4, but every time it cut to Russia, I was a little bit like, okay, this plot's not doing it as much for me, but the rest of it was great. I think this season, it's been kind of maybe a mixed bag overall in terms of what plots were firing well at any given time. Because it's funny that I actually ended up loving a lot of the Max Holly stuff, and I think the idea of Holly growing confidence and becoming almost the new Max in this episode when she's helping the other kids felt like a great payoff to that. And then the idea that she's the new Mike for her generation at the very end to sort of pass the torch, all that was great. And I think that ending works really well, because not only is there a new group of young kids playing D&D in that same basement, you know, at least we've met all these kids before, and 2 of them in particular we've gotten to know really well, in Holly and Derek, so we've cared about them. So it's not just a random bunch of kids that don't mean anything. So that's also really great. And it's funny that I ended up loving the Holly and Max stuff, because that started kind of rough. Like that episode 4, I complained that it was really clunky the way Max was just telling all this exposition to her. It wasn't the most elegant storytelling ever, but I think a lot of the payoff to that and the way it built after that fact, where it was more about actually having to get to know each other and like help each other, really built a lot of good character in Holly. She's kind of one of the great hurrahs of this final season. And I don't want to sound too down, because I kind of still liked a lot of this episode, but I was kind of feeling at a certain point as I was watching it that it's one of the weaker stories that the show has had, where it just feels like either they had too many characters, or like some characters just kind of had one, like they had one big thing for L planned this season, and everything up until this point has been kind of just stalling with her and Hopper to get to this point, instead of actually having given them a plot that would really open up these ideas of her thinking she has to sacrifice herself, so that this cycle of experimentation and violence doesn't continue. I think there was a much better, more elegant way to do that. And the problem with making Callie be this voice that puts the idea in her head is that Callie already comes from an unlikable episode, and then she gives Elle this idea, and then other than that, she just kind of stands around. She doesn't really have anything else going on. So all she is this voice for this really negative idea that feels forced. And you know, I'm going to say something kind of mean here almost, but I don't think her death counts that much in this final episode, in that, and I say that before I say this other thing, which is that I do feel that the finale's a little bit toothless. I think it's really notable that no one other than Callie died, and I know it sounds a bit mean to say that she doesn't count, but I think, I don't know which character I would have wanted, right? I mean, I can easily pick one of the ones that I don't like as much, and that would obviously make some sense from a personal standpoint, but I don't even think I have like a particular person in mind that should have died. I just think that everyone in the main cast felt very safe in this episode, regardless of what was going on. And, you know, I'm getting all my negatives out of the way up front here, I guess, because I think that's the thing, is that, you know, I want to love this unconditionally, because it is this emotional goodbye to all these characters. But I think when I think of my favorite seasons of Stranger Things, and I've liked all of them to some extent, they're all the ones that I love are very well constructed. I think 3's the best season, then 4, then 1, and then 2, then 5. Like that's my ranking. And I think a big part of is how like season 4 is so well constructed, with how like one thing leads into the other, and like when some of the characters end up in the Upside Down, and then how they find a way to communicate back again to the main world, and how all that ties into the Freddy Krueger style plot with Vecna. Like everything just felt like it's so intricate and like well thought out. And I think here it feels a little bit clunkier, and I don't know if that's just, again, too many characters, or They just didn't know what to do with certain characters, except for their one moment maybe near the end, or whatever it may be. Like I can't even begin to diagnose why it feels that way in certain things. But to get into some positives, because that's the negative stuff, right? That's the stuff where it's like, hey, it's not perfect. It's not the best episode of the show. Part of you always wants the final episode to be the best episode of the entire thing, because it feels like you've saved the best for last. But most shows don't actually get that. So, you know, sometimes they peak in the middle, they peak near the start, they peak wherever. There's a lot of stuff in here that I love, though. There's a lot of stuff in here that lands really hard. There's a lot of stuff in here that I really like. I've had one small critique just before I keep going. When our main characters do get onto the Abyss, the other planet, like, the dodgy green screening compositing, because obviously there's no place to shoot this. This is just something with them standing in front of a green screen. Like, it's always, like, looked a bit iffy at times when they're in the upside down, because that's mostly green screened, obviously, as well. I think because this place is a lot more brightly lit and there's no, like, mist or anything like that, it was actually standing out a lot more as the camera was cutting to face, like, just how kind of separate from the background they all were. So that was taking me out of it a little bit, and it's kind of funny that that's there, and that makes it feel kind of cheap, but then the main flare gets up and it's like, oh, this looks really expensive. They spent a shit ton of money on this. Like, this is huge. This, not just physically huge, but it's huge from a budget perspective. So it's really weird to have that disconnect with one shot, and then immediately in the next shot, here's this giant kaiju sized monster that we spent a lot of money on, and it looks good. It looks great. So anyway, yeah, so things that were great. Obviously, you've got them claiming the tower. You've got all this stuff going on. You've got the military, like, sort of figuring out that someone hacked the gate, and that leads to Erica and the teacher, or at the very least, it leads to the van that goes back to the radio station, which leads to Max and not Molly Ringwald. I can never remember her name. But all the stuff with the main characters, like, you know, once the characters get into the Abyss and they're walking there, it did feel like they were walking to the thing for a while, actually. It felt like every so often it would cut back to them and they were like, okay, we're continuing on to get to Holly. But then we cut back to them and they still weren't there yet. So that was a little bit funny. But a lot of that stuff is focusing mainly on Elle and Callie in Elle's mind, who brings in Max. You know, and that's not even the first time Max has been in here to some extent, you know, after the piggybacking last season. But they go after Vecna, and the idea is that Max can show them around, get to the kids. So they've got that going on. And, you know, Callie uses her powers in here. It was kind of interesting to me, like, how exactly do the powers work in here? Because we're inside a mind. Like, is there any reason why they have to work the same way they do in the outside? And I think the reason why I really thought that, though, is because at one point Callie jumps at him and tries to stab him with a knife, and Vecna just disappears because he's woken up in the real world, so he just disappears from in here. But I was thinking, what's a knife going to do in here? I mean, do you think that was going to work? I don't know. But what I like about this is, like, them convincing the kids that Vecna's evil, Callie using her illusion, so that Vecna talks in front of them, shows his demonic arm, and they all see what he really is. And they all run to the cave, but because Vecna comes out into the real world, or at least beams some thoughts to Hopper, it makes Hopper think that he shot Elle, which was a really cool moment, actually, and I actually thought it was really ballsy if they were going through with this, but it was just in his head. But it does pull Elle out of Vecna's head, and because she's the one that's brought in Callie and Max, they also get pulled as well, so Max has to yell to Holly, you know, get them to the cave. So even though, like, help's arrived, Holly's now kind of left on her own to be in charge. So she does, you know, she gets them to the cave. She goes back for Derek when he's, you know, left behind. In fact, when Vecna tries to grab Holly at the entrance to the cave and they're able to get away, Derek turns around, gives him the finger and says, you know, suck my fat one. Which, you know, at this point, it's become such a catchphrase for him that him saying it to Vecna made me want to cheer for him. Like, it was like, yeah, get him, Derek, get him in all your dipshitty ways. Oh, and speaking of swearing, I have been saying, I think in both the previous videos I did in this season, I said it felt like there was maybe going to be an F-bomb. I don't know why I had that feeling. Maybe it was just because it felt a bit more like we're you know, inching towards darker gore, and we're inching towards darker themes and more danger, whatever. And I said it a couple times, so I actually kind of popped a little bit when Joyce dropped an F-bomb in this episode, and then they give her the big moment. In fact, not only did they give her the big moment where she says it, she actually gets the final kill on Vecna. Obviously, he's already heavily injured by this point, so it's not like she's doing whatever. But she, she hacks his head off with an axe as she remembers what he did to her son, and it cuts around all the other characters as they're remembering what Vecna's done to them. Holly remembers her mother getting injured. She even Joyce even remembers Bob, and so on. We get a bunch of these little cutaways to like characters who have died. Eddie, Dustin's thinking of Eddie, so on and so on. So, and it's a decent moment. Don't get me wrong. It's a fun moment, and it's like big deal because like Joyce has spent this whole show being scared that her son was taken away and being overprotective. So it feels like a big deal she gets to get the killing blow. But to go back, so the monster stuff is good. Like I really like when they realize this thing that's crumpled up, these big kind of legs. I mean, I don't even know if I'd called them legs before, but it turns out to be the main Flare's legs, right? And it wakes up when it realizes there's people here and comes after them. And there's some like Nancy gets a pretty badass moment here where they're like, hey, if one of us can lure it over there to those cliffs, we can be ready at the top to try and help take it on. And I thought it was actually going to be more of a direct callback to season 3 with the fireworks, because that was kind of how they fought it then. But now they've got like actual Molotovs and flamethrowers and more grown-up weapons, if you will. And so Nancy, they say who's going to be the bait, and Nancy's like, I will, and she walks off towards it with her machine gun. And I thought, oh, Nancy got to be a badass there. That was kind of fun. And I also thought that because she gave Mike the flare gun when he asked for a gun, I thought when she almost was about to get bit, I thought it was going to be a flare that came in and like sort of saved her ass. It ended up just being Molotovs and a flamethrower from Jonathan and Lucas. But I think I expected a little bit more out of this when they set that up of her being a badass, and it kind of felt like it was maybe over a little quicker than I thought. There was kind of a moment where, Elle at this point has jumped inside Vecna, or inside the main flare, I should say, and is fighting Vecna one-on-one. And Will's helping out as well by trying to hold Vecna back, and it's a whole thing. And I sort of realized, oh, this is the final fight, and we're like barely halfway through the episode. And I'm not surprised because there was going to be a lot of epilogue. I was just surprised with how kind of simple it was to get to this point in the episode. When I think back to the season 4 finale and how many like threads were going on and how they were all interweaving and how much of a difficult mission it felt like. It felt just a little bit in the easy side, I guess, compared to what they've done before in a lot of ways. So, but regardless of that, though, like a lot of the visuals here of the monster did look good. Nancy being a badass was really cool. Elle fighting him, great. I will say they copped out a little bit with Elle, because Elle, of course, had to jump up here, right? And they do a whole bit where, like, Elle and Hopper have already had a couple of heart-to-hearts about, not making this choice to not come back and so on and so on by this point. But Elle's like, hey, I can get up there and help them. I can fight Vecna. I can jump on those floating rocks to get up there. And it's a really big jump, right? Like, to the point where I'm like, I said at the end of last season, they keep calling her Supergirl. She's going to end up flying. She's going to use her powers to fly. And I thought, well, this wasn't quite flying, but this is a really big jump, so it'll feel kind of close to it. And it cuts away, and then of course, it's when the monster's coming for the others, the big rock comes in and hits it in the face, and it's the big dramatic save at the last second from the character who we didn't know if it was going to make there in time. And the show loves doing that. The show's done that numerous times throughout the years. It's done it multiple times in the season 3 finale, which I love. But I will say I felt a little bit like a cop-out to not at least see the first jump. And I know that sounds like, oh, I want to see the big effect, but it was such a big jump. I'm not saying I need to see her hopping up every rock, but it felt a bit weird to not even just see the first one. And I get they wanted to like make it a nice surprise when she showed up, but I almost feel like I feel like I would have gotten more out of at least seeing her make one big leap to this rock, right? Like just give me a big side shot with her in slow motion or something flying through the air. It's not like it's out of this show's budget at this point with this monster I've got, on the planet. I feel like they could have easily have done that. But regardless, Elle is like fighting Vecna back onto this spike, and Will rips off his arm with his connection to him from the outside. So it feels like it takes everyone, and at the same time, everyone else is firebombing the main flare. And because of the hive mind, it's affecting Vecna as well. So that's going backwards and forwards. I guess there's a lot to, talk about here. I think when they introduced Vecna, there was kind of a question of, did he create the Mind Flayer? Is he in control of the Mind Flayer? Is the Mind Flayer a separate thing? Kind of thing. So I kind of liked part of this reveal. I liked that the Mind Flayer is from this planet, and that it's its own thing. Because while I really love season 4 and a lot of what it does, I think the one thing that maybe I wasn't in love with, especially the more time went on in hindsight, was the idea that Vecna was like just the main thing behind everything, as opposed to the Mind Flayer, which, season 2 spent a lot of time teasing, and then season 3 obviously made him more physical. It felt a bit maybe weird if that was just under a Vecna creation. I kind of liked that this confirmed, no, that's also a thing. If anything, it's the mastermind behind this. And Vecna's like the broken human being that decide to like, not just like do its bidding, but, actively wants to do its bidding. Like, he actively like chooses to be on his side. Because Will makes a whole speech about, hey, Henry, you can help us. You don't have to do what it says. You can help us fight the Mind Flayer. And he's like, no, I want to be on his side. The world's broken. The human race is broken. I'm going to help this thing. So I appreciate that they, like, someone tried to like appeal to his humanity, but I actually like more that he didn't like make a face turn right here at the end, because I think there was very little redeeming qualities to Henry and Vecna throughout his 2 seasons on the show. I think that would have felt pretty lame if he had just turned around and been good. So I'm glad they didn't take that route. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's good. And obviously, everyone hugs, they find the kids, they pull them out, and all the rest of it. They also do another like sharp cut where, like, after Joyce has hacked off Vecna's head with an axe, they tell Hopper, like, it just cuts to them all on the ground, like climbing off the tower. And Dustin's like, hey, Hopper, we've got everyone, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Like, you made such a big deal of how hard it was for you to all climb this tower. I think at least a couple of quick cutaways of, like, the kids looking down at this tower and realizing, what was Derek's reaction to climbing down this thing? I feel like Derek would be struggling, no? I did like Derek hugging what's his face? God, his name's Steve. He's hugging Steve when he wakes up. It's a whole emotional moment. There's too many characters on this goddamn show. And I did think, though, the show, this is a pacing thing again. There's a few scenes in the first half that felt a little clunky to me, where 2 characters would stop to have a heart-to-heart. There's one with Mike and Will when they're climbing the tower, which felt a little unnecessary. Mike sort of tries to apologize and says, I should have known, I should have, like, saw that you were going through something. I should have recognized that you were different and been there to help you. And, I guess the sentiment's okay, but it felt just a little bit like, we don't really have time for this. And it kind of feels like Will's in a pretty good place after his big speech. I don't know if this feels that necessary. And then the other one is Steve and Jonathan having kind of a talk about not liking each other and their relationships to Nancy as they're walking towards the kids on the planet. And I just kind of, and it's just okay, it's written okay. Like, I think what they say makes sense. But I don't, again, I didn't really feel like I needed it. I think Jonathan being the one to save Steve, like, all it needed was Steve, like, giving him a look and saying thanks. That's it. There you go. You've tied up their tension. It feels like, you know what, we're over this now. We don't need to have some sort of weird heart to heart. Where we both admit we've been dicks and so on. I could have done with a little bit less of that. I don't think it was necessary, and it did kind of just like come in to slow things down at points when I don't think we needed that. So yeah, I feel like I'm critiquing a lot, and I think there is a lot to critique. But I do want to be clear though, as much as I'm critiquing it, right? Because I'm critiquing it for not being perfect. I'm critiquing it for not being as special as some of the other parts of the show goes. I mean, this episode, and to an extent the season, but this episode especially feels a lot more concerned with like giving the characters a goodbye than it is about having as intricate or as fun of storyline that they've done in the past. And it's not that season 5's been without that. I think episodes 5 and 6 were really cool. I really loved all the stuff with the Demogorgon coming to get Holly back at the end of episode 1, start of episode 2. I loved the stuff in the hospital in episode 6. There's been a lot of great things this season, but there's just been maybe some of the more clunkier storylines, and a bit more, it's probably been the most uneven it's ever been, perhaps, during this season. But anyway, I mean, I think the big thing, though, is that you're waiting for the military to come back into it. Obviously, like, yeah, some of the guys that come and try and, like, you know, get them in the building, like Murray has his big heroic moment of blowing up the helicopter, and Elle just snaps all their necks and makes the one guy shoot himself. And although at this point he seems quite vicious, so it feels like he has it coming a bit more than he would have done otherwise. When they're leaving, though, and you know that the military is going to be like, you know, because I thought there was going to be more of a, like, they've set off the timers for this explosive to take out the energy source that will collapse the upside down in the wormhole, right? I thought, oh, the military's going to, like, try and block them in here, and they're going to have to try and fight through them or convince them, hey, this place is all going to be destroyed. If we don't leave all of us right now, we're all going to die. I thought that was going to be some tension. Instead, they actually just get out the upside down, but immediately the military set up a barricade, some spike strips and all that kind of thing. And immediately, as soon as people start saying, where's Elle, when she was on the truck with everyone else, and everyone was too happy before, already something felt a bit fishy, where it was like, oh, was she never really here? Part of me was thinking that she was still at the building and Callie had been projecting her like for a long time. Having said that, though, she had been hugging people, and I know that's not necessarily, it doesn't make sense because she'd have been fighting Vecna. But my mind just jumped to Callie, and I was like, okay, well, we know Callie's got powers of illusion. It makes sense that she's somehow involved in this. But you know, the whole thing plays out where Elle tries to talk to Mike in her head and explains this is her choice, and she has to end with this, and Mike's very emotional, and it is what it is. And the explosion happens, the upside down's collapsing, and the portal's gone, so they all look up afterwards, and there's just like a destroyed building there. There's no portal anymore, and everyone's deeply upset. And that's kind of how we wrap that up. So when it skips ahead, though, to 18 months later, and it's 1989, which happens to be the year I was born, so this is a weird full circle thing for me, was this ending. It's also the last year of the 80s, which I guess makes sense given this is such an, you know, 80s show in spirit. But, you know, it's the day of the graduation, and we kind of see where everyone is now. We see Max is skateboarding again, her and Lucas are in a good place. Dustin's mum's being just as overbearing as she always has been. You know, it gives you the feel goods of everyone. The younger kids, you know, Erica, Holly, Derek are all at the graduation. Robin's doing a bit of DJing, although she's just guesting here because she doesn't live here anymore. And we get a lot of little things being tied off for all the various characters. You know, Dustin makes this big speech as valedictorian. And basically says, you know, like the principles of Square, and like, you know, this last 6 years has been chaos, but you know, I made friends. I made friends that I wouldn't have otherwise. You know, and he's thinking Steve. You have like Holly and Derek looking at each other, and you know, he makes a nice little speech about friendship. He rips off the robe, reveals the Hellfire Club shirt. The confetti cannons go off, and everyone's cheering and wooing and whatever else. There's some nice little details in here, though, that I do like. Like, so Karen has got like a big scar on her neck and chest from the attack at the start of this season, and she's worried when Mike's not showing up, because Mike's like missing for a little bit, and Hopper goes to find him, and Hopper basically gives him a speech about how Mike can choose to obsess over this and blame himself for it, but he'll push people away and he'll be miserable forever. And he's basically talking about himself and what happened after his daughter died. That's what he was. I kind of wish they didn't go that one step further of Hopper saying, hey, I chose that first option, kid, and I don't recommend it. I think that was maybe a little bit on the nose. I already got that he was talking about his own experience with his daughter. I don't think I needed like that on top. But regardless, you know, he convinces him to go to the graduation, and Mike has a thought, clearly, when he sees all the speakers at the graduation. Something clicks in his brain. And that comes back up a little bit later. But, you know, we get goodbye scenes, like the older, you know, kids, quote unquote, you know, they were teenagers at the start of the show anyway, which is, you know, Robin, Steve, Jonathan, and Nancy. They all have different haircuts pretty much. Well, Steve doesn't, but of course, why would they change perfection? I mean, that makes sense. But, you know, they're all talking about what their lives are like right now, where they are, what the past they're going. Steve being a coach for, like, the little league or whatever, and teaching sex ed feels like it's come full circle for him, where he's promoting safe sex amongst teenagers as opposed to, you know, engaging in less safe sex like he was back at the start of the show. So there's some nice full circle things, and they make a vow to meet up with each other in Philadelphia, just because it happens to be the city that's kind of in the middle of where everyone is right now. And, you know, it's all very pleasant. It's very nice. I wouldn't say that a lot of the details of what they talk about really stuck out to me all that much, other than maybe Steve's whole thing. But, you know, it felt pleasant enough. And of course, I'm thinking as I'm watching this, oh, this is their final scene, right? Barring maybe a little glimpse, this is the last time we're seeing these characters. This is this generation's goodbye, and we're definitely going to end the episode with our main core group, right? The kids who are all Mike's age. And that's what we do. We do go to Joyce and Hopper first, and they have their proposal, and like he's like, "Hey, let's go move to Montauk," which is a bit of an in joke because that was the original title of the store of the show. I think at least the code name of the show before they made it was Montauk or something like that. But it's near the city where where both our sons are going to be living, so it's like, you know, closer to them to visit, that kind of thing. This is okay. Obviously, it's at the restaurant that Hopper wanted to take her to in season 3. There's a lot of little callbacks like that in this episode of, hey, I want you to go do this, or referencing this movie we talked about before, or this band we talked about before. It's an okay scene. I don't know if, like, him proposing to Joyce was something I needed all that much, but I get why it's here. I get that it's the goodbye to these characters, and they get something of a happy ending, and they're ready to move on. But I almost don't know if I need to be as long as this. I think just him opening the box and just leaving it on the, like, oh, that's probably where they're going. They're going to go down this path. And because they're already a couple anyways. It's not like this is a whole new thing thrust upon them. It's just the idea of the move and the of the marriage proposal. But we also see Hopper's a cop again. I don't know if I mentioned that already, but we end with the kids, though. We end with the kids. And I want to say, for anything else I have said about this finale, right? And there's moments I enjoyed for the spectacle. There's moments, you know, the monster was fun, although it's nowhere near as fun as some of the best stuff this show has done in past seasons. But I liked a lot of elements throughout, even if I have had a lot of critiques, because I do think there's a lot of things to critique here. It's not as great as it has been. It's a bit clunkier and whatnot. I want to say that I did this last like 5 minutes, I loved. The last 5 or so minutes of this episode, I think, are just about perfect. Which is, they're playing D&D. They've been invited to a party. You know, the pretty girl came up and said, "Hey, I really like what you said, Dustin." And Dustin almost blows it by being nerdy, but she still turns around and says, "Hey, do you want to come to this party I'm throwing?" And I can't remember if it is or not, but I'm willing to bet this is the girl that he wanted to dance with back in season 2. I could be wrong. I don't remember her name. But I've got a funny feeling that's probably her, because that just makes sense from a closing the loop kind of perspective. But they're playing D&D, right? And Max is there too. So Max, while she wasn't there in season 1 when they were playing D&D, and everything about this scene as well, starting on the sprinklers, you know, we cut to the sprinklers outside the house, which is how we started the original season with. You know, eventually, of course, Karen shouting down that dinner's almost ready to make them all leave and all that kind of thing. Like, there's a lot of little callbacks to mirror those opening scenes back from the first season. But obviously Max is there now because she was introduced a bit later. But they're playing D&D, they're very into it. Things look bad, and they summon a mage to ultimately win the campaign, and the mage was kind of representing Elle back in the day, so there's kind of a symbolism there. And, you know, Max kind of criticizes Mike for wrapping it up too quickly by saying, "Hey, you get a lot of money and you live in comfort ever after. Bye-bye." And she's like, "I thought you were some good storyteller, Mike. What's that shit?" And then everyone else is sort of giving looks like, "Oh, she's got a point." And he starts basically describing where he sees all these characters going, but it's obviously very on the nose to what, like, these people, you know, the people, these friends are going to be doing. And we see little cutaways to, like, Dustin in college, but he still meets up with Steve and goes on adventures. We see Will a gay bar somewhere because he's found somewhere to be accepted. Lucas and Max are still a couple, and that love will grow stronger. And they're all kind of getting a little bit emotional, and someone says, "What about the storyteller?" And he says he'll keep telling stories, and we see that he's writing at a typewriter, so maybe he becomes a writer, and and so on. So this is all nice epilogue stuff, and it all works really well. But then he says, but he can't ever tell the story about the mage, right? There's a story that he can't tell about the true story, and they all kind of go, wait, what about the true story? And this is where he gives his theory, right? He gives his theory that Callie was still alive and had concocted a plan with Elle to give her basically invisibility and make it look like she was standing on the upside down side. And the way that Mike presents it is that Hopper's words about convincing Elle to stay alive and that she deserved happiness convinced Callie that, yeah, she does deserve to be happy, so I'm going to help her achieve that. So the idea is that Elle sneaks away when no one can see her because of the illusion, and everyone thinks that Elle dies, including all of her friends and family. And that way, no one's ever going to catch her, talking to them or, them going after her. Everyone's going to be convinced. I mean, I guess, honestly, because it felt so obvious that there was a fake out when Elle's big, death, if you want to call it that, happened, I was kind of expecting her to just show up later on, and maybe after 18 months is enough time where things have died down, she'll appear. Instead, they go for this thing where, Mike says, oh, she found comfort somewhere, and she went somewhere, and we see that we see Elle walking. I'll be honest, it looked kind of like the Highlands of Scotland, I'm not going to lie. It may be just somewhere similar, maybe Iceland or something like that, maybe somewhere in Scandinavia. It's somewhere in that kind of general vicinity of the planet, but it definitely looked like it was in that kind of part of the world. And she sees some waterfalls, and she looks content, and Mike, and basically they're all tearing up. They've all got tears going down their eyes, and he's like, that's what I choose to believe, because we can't know for sure. And then they all one by one say, I believe, and they're all crying as they say it, and it's kind of this sweet moment. It's a good sequence. Given how, I think, not well done the Elle sacrifice or fake sacrifice was set up, and how much I didn't really buy the decision that was she was suddenly having to make. It didn't feel like something that they'd really set up for me to believe was something she would actually think about or consider. I think this scene of them all hoping she has a happy ending, even if it's without them, did actually feel quite sweet. And I think the reason partly why it landed is because seeing them all tear up, and a couple of them who are the better actors really nailing the reactions to it. Mainly Max and Dustin being the two that I think you tend to get me the most because they're the better actors of the bunch. I thought it was good, and then then the kids theme starts playing. The theme that introduced the kids back in the day. We get a piano version of it as they all put their D&D folders back, and then as Mike's walking up the stairs, Holly and her friends, including Derek, all run down. She's running a campaign, and Mike smiles a little bit as he walks up the stairs, and the door shuts. We fade to black. Because we didn't get full titles at the start. It actually was just the letters of the name Stranger Things coming in, but it didn't do the whole thing where it was going through all the names. They saved that for the end, and they do a whole extended title sequence with Heroes playing by David Bowie. So that's how it wrapped up. Honestly, I think the epilogue stuff was pretty solid. It's weird because I think the overall sentiment of it was right, and the way they were, and the great thing about them making this show from when these kids were all about 11 or 12 is that they have footage they can cut back to. They can cut back to the first time Mike and Elle met each other, and they're practically babies. They look so young, but it's the same actors, so you really feel the passage of time. And yeah, I know too much time has passed because the actors are a decade older as opposed to 4 years older, but it still works well enough, and you still feel that passage of time. And I think, despite this being a bit of a weaker season, for a bunch of reasons, mainly structure, a couple of plots. I think almost every episode had something really good in it, so it was easy to kind of enjoy the show anyway, even if there was things to critique throughout. Looking back on it now that we're done, I really do think the Ellen Hopper side of it felt really undercooked. Especially when she brought in Callie, and it was just Callie whispering in her ear, hey, you have to end this by not coming back, kind of thing. That stuff felt really undercooked to me. And that's a bit of a shame. And I think specifically in this finale, the plan goes a little too easy and smoothly. Yeah, there's a little bit of like, oh, maybe the tower will fall down because the planet's still moving, like tension. But, you know, I was expecting it to do that Stranger Things thing where it would start jumping around as each person was doing something that would matter and like help someone else in part of the plan out. And they did throw me some swerves, like the whole fake out of Hopper thinking he'd shot Elle. I do think that was effectively done in the moment. I do like everyone teaming up to take on the Mind Flayer. But the funny thing is that as much as it's more spectacle technically by having this fight with the real Mind Flayer on this alien planet, which is cool in concept, and there's definitely some aspects of it that feel quite cool, it was actually way more fun when they were fighting it in a mall, because there's a sense of geography. They're not just standing in front of a green screen. There's different places to hide. There's like recognizable things that give you a sense of the space, as opposed to this, where it's just a big flat, craggy rock CG world, where it's never going to be as exciting. I think the comparison I would make is how the end of Avengers 1 is like set in New York City, right? So even if you don't know New York that well, and I don't really, right? I recognize a few landmarks. I recognize Grand Central Station and a few other particular buildings, but for the most part, it's just buildings. But because it's got streets, because there's some basic ideas and principles of a city layout that we all understand, and we understand the height of the different buildings and how much it is to fall and so on, there's a sense of geography to everything that just makes it a more fun fight than, say, the end of a lot of other superhero movies where it's just a big flat battlefield where, like, you know, some explosions happen, so it's all just kind of burning. I'm thinking of the end of Batman v Superman. I'm thinking of the end of Wonder Woman, and I'm not just dragging on DC, but those are the ones that come to mind, where it just feels like a big blank brown gray CG flat background with smoke. And it's not exactly looking like that here, but it's kind of a similar idea where fundamentally, because it's all fake, it doesn't feel like a cool location to fight this monster in. It felt a lot cooler when it was in a real location that we understand the principles of, and it feels like they're on their turf. And I get the logic of like, oh, now we're on its turf, so it's harder. He's got the home field advantage. Like, I get the idea behind that, but I think to do that, we would have had to have spent a bit more time there and getting to know the place and understanding maybe if there is some other rules here or other like types of things to like just at least recognizing the landscape that's not just generic rocks for as far as the eye can see. Something that sticks out a little bit. That would have been nice. Because, you know, I was having the feeling that once Elle's inside the Mind Flayer fighting Vecna, and like they're fighting around and there's all these big spiky rocks sticking out of the ground, if it even is the ground, because we're kind of inside the Mind Flayer at this point, so maybe it's the Mind Flayer's inner stomach or whatever. But when this is happening, I was thinking, yeah, this does feel a bit goofier, because it's these big like fake spiky rock things they've built, and I appreciate that they're there. I prefer that they're there rather than just being CG, but there is kind of a little bit of like almost a 60s Star Trek feel to little parts of that set, and I'm like, yeah, this was cooler in the mall. Like it felt more real, it felt more interesting, and I do think that if I was to make a giant suggestion to completely redo some of this finale, I would have said that the Mind Flayer, however it would have happened, you know, take your pick how it happens, but I would have said the Mind Flayer should have somehow ended up in real Hawkins. Not in the Upside Down, but that square, that town square where the church is and where the portal gate is and where the tower is that Eric and the teacher were up in, and we've got the general store where Joyce used to work. We understand some things that are here. We understand basic geography of a town square. So it's not the exact same as a mall, of course, but this idea that this thing comes out and maybe the military realize, oh, we have to work with these like renegades to try and take this thing out. I think that might have been a little bit more interesting, or at least have the fight end there. Have it like maybe like chase them to like the Upside Down, and yeah, maybe have a bit of a race against time as it's chasing them. Like maybe kill Vecna, but that doesn't kill the monster, so it chases them back to the portal. They end up in the town square, and you know, like we have a big showdown there, and there's a lot more to it because we've got different buildings to hide in and out of, and rooftops to run across, and anything else we could possibly do. And you know, because if the idea is to make it feel like a leveled up version of that season 3 finale fight, then I think that would maybe help do that. Even though I think you would still have to think of some inventive ways to engage in the fight. Whereas I think here, this doesn't feel like it was much of a level up. Like, yes, the initial shots of the monster rising looked really cool, and it's like, hey, he's got an advantage here, we're kind of underpowered. I think in the end, the fight in the mall felt way more epic to me because there were stages to it, there was close calls, there was, different ideas to try and take it on that paid off things that had been set up earlier. Here, it kind of came out of nowhere, and then within, 15 minutes, it was gone, it was done, it was over. So I think there was maybe a misstep there. It does kind of feel like maybe they struggled a little bit to like bring some of the elements together in this final season. They had some really good ideas for some stuff. I praised the Jonathan Nancy scene from episode 6. I thought that was great. I still think that's a great scene. It's great stuff. I like all the stuff with in the hospital with Karen helping and them trying to hide from the demi-dogs. Like, all that stuff was great. Like, there's lots of good stuff throughout here. I think the Holly torch passing and her becoming capable and helping the other kids and being this hero in her own right, becoming Holly the heroic, is one of the great ideas that the show has had. It's almost just like this kind of felt like the season where maybe there was just a little bit too much to cope with to make it all click together and all sort of work together in a way that flowed effortlessly, in the way that some seasons I think have mostly done in the past. So I'm not like mad, I'm not disappointed even that much, but other than just that small disappointment of realizing, this is probably the weakest season. I think it's the weakest finale of any of the seasons, and that's okay. Like, one of the 5 has to be the weakest. It's a shame it's the last one because you want the last one to be great. I still think I'm going to enjoy all of the epilogue stuff and the goodbye stuff on rewatches, and I will rewatch this show. It's a very rewatchable show. I've already rewatched the first before season 4. I rewatched seasons 1 to 3 again because I wanted to, and I had a great time. If anything, I liked season 3 even more than I did the first time. I think that season holds up immensely. I think season 4 is great, and it's okay that this isn't the best one. It is. Obviously, it'd have been nice for it to be up to the standard of the last couple. And I know that everyone and for the record, I keep saying season 2 is my favorite. I know there's people online who think it's easily the worst season, and I don't know why. I actually don't get it. Why? I don't need to get it, but I know that there's different opinions there, and I feel the way I do, and I don't know how that shakes up. But most people seem to like 4 for the most part. Although, again, I'm sure there's exceptions. But yeah, no, it's a good show. It's a great show, even. And when it's at its best, it's like almost perfect for me. Like, it feels like it was made to and it kind of is in a lot of ways. Like, people who grew up in the 90s like I did grew up watching stuff from the 80s, and people who were a bit older as well, I imagine, the late Gen Xers, assuming they were in the 80s as well, they probably, this is hitting a lot of things for them. Like, I grew up watching a lot of the stuff this show is inspired by, and I think, generally speaking, when you describe what Stranger Things is on paper, it probably sounds like a cheap nostalgia bait show, and I think the majority of the show is much, much better than I think anyone would give it the expectation of. I think it's far more intricate and juggles a lot of characters in a way that old ensemble shows used to do on a more regular basis. Like, it's, in some ways, it's the closest thing I've had to a Buffy since Buffy. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it's as good as that or as important as that, but in some ways, it's tapping a little bit back into that. The ragtag group of friends who are still in school, who are trying to fight some evil. Like, it's getting into those kind of vibes, but it's also tapping into all this 80s stuff. But it's not just about the nostalgia. It's kind of, it did a good job of really creating characters over the course of the season that you really latch onto. And again, not every single one's going to be equal. I mean, very few people give a shit about Jonathan, and really ever did. He was always kind of a bit of a cliched character, even right from the start. But the way they turned around Steve, with how likable Max is, with even this final season, like Holly, and even to an extent Derek, like there's been so many good characters throughout this show that they're very easy to care for, even if occasionally a plot line isn't the greatest, and I think this finale is a bit clunky, and this season is maybe a bit clunky in setting some of that stuff up. It almost feels like, because I don't know if they like, maybe they would have wanted 9 episodes instead of 8, but they kind of cut back to save some money for the big effects for the monster, or if it's because they had the idea of doing the finale in theaters or something, that they felt they needed to have it be a little bit more simplistic so they could get through it in a timely fashion. But it felt like it was lacking the complexity of how some of the previous finales and all the big plans that they'd laid out, because they go to shit and they have to improvise and they have to think of new ways around things. And here it felt a little bit on fast forward versus how it happened in season 4 or 3, and even to an extent 2 as well. Because I love the season 2 finale. 2 is obviously a little bit weaker in places, particularly the Callie episode, but like I love like there's like 3 episodes towards the end of that season, once you take out that side story, that I think are all fantastic. And at the time I was like, oh, this might be some higher highs than season 1. It's just a bit, the season's just a bit more uneven. And I think season 3 and 4 got a lot more even, but kept hitting high highs. I think this season feels like it's in kind of this weird territory of like hitting some good highs, but not the highest of highs that the show's had, and being the least consistent season of the show as well. So there's a lot to appreciate in here. There's a lot to enjoy. There's a lot to get out of it. But I think, I want to keep a clear head and kind of recognize that, it's working for me because they've made me attached to all these characters so much. But the writing this season definitely is a bit weaker than I think overall the show has been on average. Not that it's always been perfect. There's always been things to critique. But I think here maybe it's the most flawed season, but not without still great things to enjoy, or even new things to enjoy. And again, that's going back to the Holly Derek and this new generation of kids that are coming up. Like, I think all that stuff was handled pretty well, actually. But that means you've got to handle these new characters that you don't have as much time for some of the other ones, so it kind of feels like, they only have a small amount to do, or they've got one big thing to do, and you're just kind of stalling until that moment where they've got their big thing, or they've done their big thing early on, so then they're just kind of around for the rest of the season, kind of thing. So yeah, those my thoughts on the Stranger Things finale. I'm sure there's some stuff that I could also add on, and like other things I could bring up, but honestly my brain's fried at this point. It's been a very long day of recordings, tapped off with Stranger Things. It's a great show that I'm looking forward to revisiting in the future. I think it's kind of like some of the best well-made popcorn that there is, right? It's it's not The Wire or a Breaking Bad or something like that. It was never supposed to be that. It is the best feeling. It's basically junk food, but it's actually really well-made junk food most of the time. And you feel like there's a craft going into it that's not complete nonsense. It's just that, yeah, there are times where you realize it is a bit junk foody. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so yeah, feelings are a little bit more complex on this final season overall, I think. So I would put it at the bottom of the list. And I imagine that'll probably stay true on a rewatch, but you never know, maybe it'll change. But that is my thoughts on season 5 of Stranger Things, and the finale, of course, specifically. Any other things I've not brought up, please feel free to do so in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that kind of thing. Yeah, I guess the one thing I've noticed I've not really talked about with this finale review is the idea of like how the lore, like other than the main flare being a thing that kind of obviously like summoned Henry in the first place, there's not a lot of talk of the mechanics of the lore, because I felt like one of the things that this show's been very good at is like taking them forward each season in ways that make sense and don't betray what they were before. Something as simple as setting up the lights blinking in season 1 and then how that's used to communicate like 2 seasons later when someone's in the upside down. That stuff is great. And I don't know if there was much in the way of that this season. It was mostly just inside someone's head, all that extra stuff. So it didn't really have to obey rules in quite the same way that this stuff used to. But hey, there you go. That's my thoughts on the Stranger Things finale. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. Of course, if you want to support everything, you can do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. and you know, all that good stuff. As for TV shows, technically I'm reviewing Fallout just now. I've only done the first episode of season 2. I wasn't actually that hot on it, but I'll try and get to the second one. I think the third one's already out. But I did recently wrap up Pluribus season 1. That was very good. I really like Pluribus season 1. So if you want to go check out reviews on that, that's there. And yeah, who knows what's ahead in 2026. But Happy New Year, everyone. I'll see you soon. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?